Hi, thank you for coming to the SK News, which is the serial killer news. I'm Coral, and we will be talking about today's serial killer is Dennis Nilsen. And Dennis Nilsen was a very odd serial killer. He portrayed stuff that other serial killers didn't, but he was he was also known as the British Jeffrey Dahmer. He had very similar things with him. But anyways, Dennis Nilsen was also known, like I said, as the British Jeffrey Dahmer, also as the Muswell Hill murderer and the Kidley killer, who lived in London. He dismembered and killed 15 men and boys. He was a very sick-minded. And now let's go back and look how his years led up to his killings. Well, first of all, he was born on November 23rd, 1945 in Fransburg, Scotland. His parents were a very unhappy marriage. They just did not get along, and so they divorced, and his father was an alcoholic. So when they divorced, his dad left, and his mom sent Dennis and his siblings to live with the grandfather. Well, when Dennis's grandfather died, unexpected death when Dennis was 6, it devastated him. And since his mom is very religious and has a very strong Catholic belief, they had a viewing of his body at the funeral. Well, Dennis was very disturbed by the body, but he was also amused. He loved it. He loved seeing the corpse, which was very weird for a 6-year-old boy. So that started his amusement for corpse. That was his first traumatic event, which led him, he believes, and the science behind him believes led him to what he did later in life. Well, when the grandfather died, Dennis's dad moved to Norway, and so Nilsen, he always knew that he had a different view on relationships than most people. He always knew he was homosexual. And so in 1961, Nilsen dropped out of high school and joined the Army. He enlisted in the Army Catering Corps and became a cook for the Scotland Army. You know, he cooked. He moved here. He traveled to Germany and Berlin. He served in the Army for 11 years, earning a General Service Medal before his discharge at his own request in November 1972. In December 1972, his next job, he was a police in the Metropolitan Police, and he was posted in London in 1973. He served 8 months as a police, but then he resigned because of this incident that happened. He came across 2 homosexuals having intercourse in a car, and at that time in London it was illegal to be homosexual, and he could not bring himself to arrest these 2 men because he was homosexual, and so that's when he decided that he could not be in the police force anymore. So he resigned. In 1974, Nilsen worked as a civil servant in London, and he was also active in the trade union movement. He was very active, but it all went back to how he grew up, and he did not have a right upbringing. His parents did not want him. He sent him with his grandfather. Then his grandfather died, so he dropped out and moved to the Army, and he just moved around. He couldn't keep a job, and so in October 1981, he moved several miles eastward to an attic flat in Muswell Hill, and his killing started this. This is when the killing started. And by 1974, his life revolved around cruising gay bars. Although it wasn't about the sex that he was looking for, it was the crave of conversation. He met a guy named David Galtoon, which was his only relationship, homosexual relationship, and they dated for 2 years. And they even had a dog named Bleep. And David called off the relationship because he always just knew something was up with Denis, and he just got bored of him, and so he moved out. And so after that, in 1978, Nilsen sank into a deep depression after spending the holidays alone. His troubles were his father being drunk, and the long absence of no connection and no feeling with anybody, because he feels like he was just passed around and he never had anybody there for him. When he was 8 years old, he nearly drowned in the sea, and he was rescued by an older boy who was playing on the beach. The boy became aroused by Nilsen's body, for he removed his clothes and apparently masturbated on him. The man masturbated on Denis. And Nilsen woke up to find a sticky white substance on his stomach. And this is when he realized that he was homosexual, when he liked guys, when this incident happened with him being, he almost drowned. His killings started in, he didn't understand why he was how he was at all. And he used his bachelor skills from the army to kill them. So his method of killings was he would first strangle the victim with either a tie, a flex, or his hands, and if that didn't work, then he drowned to make sure they were dead. And then he would give them a bath and clean them up, and then put them back into bed where Denis also slept. His first 12 victims were disposed of under the floorboard, and every so often Nilsen would take them out of their hiding place and watch television with them, communicate with them, act like they were human, or alive humans still. And sometimes he would even sleep with them, like have sex with them. The last 3 victims he strangled, he also drowned as well, but there was no floorboards in the new house of the flat that he moved to in London to hide them under. So using his skills he learned from the army, he chopped them up into small pieces and flushed them down the toilet. He dismembered the bodies, he cooked them over the stove, then he cooked the limbs over the stove, and then he would have the flush, and he would flush them down the toilet. And some of the bones he threw out with the rubbish, and the rest of them he kept in a tea chest of his house and other receptacles, and then he boiled the heads. His victims, he had 15 of them, like I said. And his first victim, the victim was only 14 at the time, and he was on the way home from a concert. And he just was unlucky, and this murder happened on December 30th, 1978, and the young boy's name was Stephen D. Holmes. And he was just walking home, and he picked him up, or Denis, invited him over for dinner, and picked him up, and he just never left, which was horrifying. And his second murder, between his first and second murder, there was an incident where Nilsen attempted to murder a student from Hong Kong, and he met in the West End. Although questioned by the police, the student decided not to prosecute, and Nilsen was released without charge because he didn't want, the victim didn't want to come out as homosexual, so he just didn't push any charges. He just let it go, but he didn't realize what was happening. His second murder, or his second murder, his name was Kenneth Oskeden, and it happened on December 3rd, 1979. His third was Martin Duffy. His fourth was Billy Southern. His fifth, the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th, they could not identify the bodies because they were all shredded up too much. The 11th victim was a skinhead that Nilsen picked up at a circus who had a tattoo around his neck saying, "Cut here." He boasted to Nilsen how he thought he was and how he liked to fight. However, once he was drunk, he proved no match for Nilsen, who hung his naked body in the bedroom for 24 hours before he was buried underneath the floorboards. The 12th victim was Malcolm Barlow. The 13th was John Howlett. The 14th was Graham Allen, and the 15th was a drug addict named Stephen Sinclair. And the victims that Denis picked up were either homosexual or homeless, and he picked them up because he felt like they also had that strive to meet someone, and that Denis had. And the reason Denis killed his victims and not let them go after he had intercourse with them was because Denis, as a child, was abandoned by his family. He didn't have anyone ever there for anyone ever there for him. He thought that he didn't have anybody. And so these victims that he would have, this all started after his relationship went downhill with David. The victims he would have were very... He killed them because he didn't want them to leave. After he would have sex with them, and that next morning is when everything went south. Because he felt like they were just going to leave, and they were just going to be like his family. He killed because he wanted to have someone there for him, and he knew that a corpse would never leave. And that was the same thing as Jeffrey Dahmer. That's why he was known as the British Jeffrey Dahmer. He would have sex with them. He would act, or with the victims after they were dead, with the corpse. He would just act like they were human. He would have conversations with them. He would sleep with them. He would even watch TV, take baths with them. He would act like they were alive, and just all because he didn't want them to leave. And it's horrifying to think about. Someone will go to the extreme to kill just because they had that abandonment issue as a child, with his father leaving him, and then his mom kicking him out, and then his grandfather dying. He felt like nobody was ever there for him. And, he got kicked out of the boys' school that he went to, and then he went to another school, and that's when he decided to drop out and go to the Army. He had no emotion for human beings. No emotion at all. He did not care about them. Denis was arrested in 1983 on suspicion of multiple murders. He apologized to the police for not being able to tell them the exact number of people he killed when he killed, because how he got caught was the floors, or the drains, when he moved to the new attic where the last 3 victims were killed in London. He didn't have any floorboards to hide them under, and he'd also burn the bodies in the old garden that he had when he killed the first 1 through 12 victims. He would burn the bodies after a period of time. Well, at this new house, he didn't have that. So what he would do is, after he would kill them, he would boil their bodies and also put them in the toilet. But the flesh from the toilet would get clogged in the drains because he lived in an apartment. And so his neighbors knew something was very odd about him, and they kept on, they would never confront him, but they always knew something was wrong. And so the drains got clogged one day, and so the apartment manager called the plumbers, and they came out, and they realized that what was clogging the drains were human flesh. Well, at this point, Denis knew that something was up. So that next night, Denis went and cleaned out the drains out. And so the next day, the plumbers called the police and the suspectors to come out and check everything. Well, they realized that it was all gone. All the flesh was cleaned up. So then they knew something was up. And so Dennis was walking in one day to his apartment, and he didn't. The police confronted him and asked him, and he denied it all. And then they were like, well, they wanted to search his apartment, which Dennis had cut up bodies, heads and stuff in his apartment. So, of course, since they were police, he had to let them in. So that's what he did. He let them in, and they found all the incidents, but they only found the last 2 or 3 victims, because those are the only victims that he killed in that apartment, because he moved. So he was arrested with 6 counts of murders and 2 counts of attempted murder. He was sentenced to life in prison on November 1st, 1983. He was denied any further request for parole. He is held currently at the HMP Full Sutton Maximum Security Prison in East Riding in New York. During prison, he wrote a book called History of Drowning, A History of a Drowning Boy, and it was never published, but he wrote it in 2003, and they would not publish it because of the homosexuality that was in it. But Dennis, his profile, he had his psychological profile right here, and I believe he had 4 different disorders. His first one was phobia and anxiety disorder. And Nilsen focused on his fears of abandonment. He killed because he feared getting left. He wants satisfaction of someone being there for him, and he knows a corpse will not leave or judge him. The next, he had borderline personality disorder, and he had instability of emotions, self-esteem, and behaviors. Emotions were detached because of his guilt from being homosexual. His self-image is broken because he believes nobody wants to be with him. His one relationship lasted 2 years. His partner left him because he became bored. He has no self-worth to himself. The next, he has disorganized schizophrenia. His bizarre behavior by talking with the corpse and sleeping with them up to a week. He indulged in sexual emotions, behaviors. He ejaculated on top of the on the corpse. He had guilt from what he is and his delusions about which caused him to stop the killings. He is a predator. The next is depression disorder. He started when his dad abandoned him. His mom sent him to his grandfather's. His mother want nothing to do with him. Dennis now, not because of the crimes and wrongdoing, Dennis's mom wants nothing to do with him now not because of the crimes and wrongdoings he has because of his homosexuality, because his mom is very religious and a very strong Catholic. His brother also wants nothing to do with him as well because of his homosexuality. He feels like nobody wants him, and his recurrent thought of death. Dennis Nilsen shows no signs of the killer or the serial killer triangle. He never bet weds after he was of age. He never played with fires. He never killed small animals. He actually endured small animals. He loved them more than humans because he knew that animals won't betray their owners. And then his psychological, or his profile, or his psychology, Eric Erickson, he went wrong in his stages of development on stage 5 of identity and role confusion because of his homosexuality and who he was. He wasn't sure who he was because nobody accepted him, and he felt like he was worth nothing because of what he is, and he couldn't help what he was. And then the next was stage 3 of Erickson, also of the preschooler, of the intensive versus guilt. He had guilt to himself because he could not help who he was. He couldn't help. And so, sometimes this was just him. and that was his psychology profile. He had phobia, anxiety disorder, he had borderline personality disorder, depression disorder, and disorganized schizophrenia. And he messed up on his stages of Erickson in stage 5 and stage 3, and showed no sign of a serial killer warnings in the serial killer triangle. Also, these are pictures of Dennis Nilsen. This is his house right here. This is him right here. This is another picture of him, and this is the book that he wrote. That was Dennis Nilsen. Thank you for coming out and listening to the SK News. This is Coral, and thank you for letting me be here. Good night.